My son's message came through at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, 2 days before Christmas. Mom, I think it's better if you sit this one out. Lizette's parents are joining us, and it's going to be a full house. You know how the cottage gets. After I had already sent the $4,800 by e-transfer. After I had pre-ordered 6 days of groceries from a shop in Charlottetown. After I had booked the rental van from Halifax Stanfield, in my name, on my visa. So I called the cottage owner that afternoon and asked her to change the lock code. She was very understanding. The booking stayed. My son did not. I want to be honest about something before I go any further. I am not a woman who makes scenes. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse in the maternity ward at a busy hospital in Barrie, and if that job teaches you anything, it teaches you how to stay calm when everything is coming apart at once. I have sat with families in fluorescent-lit hallways at 2 in the morning and told them the things no one wants to hear, and I have done it quietly, in a steady voice, because that is what people need from you when their world is ending. So when I say that I read that text, set my phone face down on the kitchen table, and went back to my coffee, please don't mistake that for acceptance. That was 31 years of practice. That was me buying myself the time to think clearly before I did anything I couldn't take back. But before I tell you what I did, I need to tell you about Ted. We went to Prince Edward Island for our 30th wedding anniversary. It was late November, which everyone thought was an odd time to go. Why not summer? People kept asking, why not when the lupins are out? But Ted had read somewhere that the island was quietest in the off-season, and Ted loved quiet above almost everything else. He was a man who could sit for an hour just watching the lake behind our house without saying a word. He said most people never learned how to just be somewhere. He didn't want to fight for a parking spot at a lobster shack. He wanted to sit on a porch and watch the Gulf of St. Lawrence turn that particular shade of gray it only turns in November, and drink coffee, and not talk unless we felt like it. So we went. We rented a small cottage near North Rustico, with a wood-burning fireplace and windows that looked straight out over the water. I made his mother's shortbread recipe in the little cottage kitchen, and Ted ate 4 pieces before dinner and pretended he hadn't. We drove along the red dirt roads and listened to a Cape Breton fiddle station on the radio, and didn't make any plans beyond that. And one afternoon, standing on the porch, watching the snow come in from the north, Ted turned to me and said, "We have to bring the whole family here someday. Everyone. Kids, grandkids, the whole lot. I want to see this view with all of them in it." He died 3 years later, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, he was 64 years old. The Christmas after he died was the hardest I had ever lived through. My son and my daughter-in-law hosted at their place in Kingston, which I was grateful for. I wasn't in any shape to host, but I sat at their table and felt like a person who had wandered in from a completely different story. The grandchildren were loud and joyful, which was good. But when they put on Christmas music, it was all songs I didn't know, and when I tried to tell a story about Ted, about how he used to eat shortbread and deny it, about the porch in North Rustico, my daughter-in-law smiled in that particular way she had, the one that was perfectly polite and perfectly final, and steered the conversation elsewhere. The shortbread I'd brought sat on the counter all evening. I carried most of it home. That night, lying awake in my own bed in Barrie with the house so quiet, it had a sound of its own. I made a decision. I was going to take the whole family to Prince Edward Island for Christmas. I was going to bring them to the place Ted had loved. I was going to put his photo on the mantel of that cottage and let the grandchildren hear the story about the gray water and the November light, and why their grandfather had wanted them to see it. Maybe it would give them something to hold on to. Maybe it would give Remy something of his father back. And maybe, if I'm being completely truthful, it would give me one Christmas that didn't feel like subtraction. I started saving in January, 11 months before I even told anyone the plan. My Canada pension plan payments were enough to live on carefully, but not enough to build anything with, so I picked up agency nursing shifts 2 Saturdays a month. Overnight shifts, usually the quiet kind, where you sit with patients who can't sleep and you talk about small things. Gardens, grandchildren, what they used to cook on Sunday mornings. I didn't mind nights. I had always been comfortable with the hours when the rest of the world wasn't watching. I also sold Ted's truck, a 2014 F-150 that I had never driven, that sat in the garage making me sad every time I walked past it. A young man 3 streets over bought it for a fair price, and I cried in the kitchen for 20 minutes after he drove it away, and then I transferred every dollar of it into a new savings account. I labeled PEI Christmas and promised myself I wouldn't touch it. On Saturday mornings, I sold preserves at the Barrie farmers market. Apple butter, crabapple jelly, bread and butter pickles. I canceled my cable subscription. I switched to the store brand coffee. Every dollar I didn't spend found its way to that account, and over 22 months it grew the way quiet things do, steadily and without drawing attention to itself. I found the cottage through a small rental agency in PEI, a place called Redstone Cottages run by a woman named Sharon who answered the phone on the second ring and had the unhurried patience of someone who has lived near water all her life. The cottage slept 10. It had the fireplace, the windows, the wraparound porch. It was $960 a night, and I booked 5 nights beginning December 22nd and sent the full $4,800 by Interac e-transfer without hesitating, because I had been building toward that number for nearly 2 years, and I finally had it. I arranged everything else myself. The grocery pre-order from a shop in Charlottetown, the 9-passenger van rental from Halifax, Stanfield, so we could all drive together across the Confederation Bridge. The booking was in my name. The rental van was on my card. I organized the flights, collected everyone's details, kept a spreadsheet. I told my son and my daughter-in-law in October. They said it sounded wonderful. My daughter-in-law said she was so glad I'd thought of it. She asked if her parents could join. Just her parents, she said quickly, not her sister. And I said of course, and rearranged the sleeping plan in my spreadsheet, and didn't say anything about the fact that the head count was now 10, and there would be barely a spare inch of the place. There was room, just barely, but there was room. I thought that was the point. I thought that was what Ted had meant. What I didn't tell anyone was how much was riding on this for me. How many cold Tuesday mornings I had gone into the hospital, still half asleep, because I needed the extra money. How many Saturday afternoons I had stood at the market table with aching feet telling strangers about crabapple jelly when I could have been home resting. I hadn't been building a vacation. I had been building a memory, one last thing I could give them that they might carry forward after I was gone. I did not think that was asking too much. The message came on December 20th at 6:47 in the morning. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down and looked at my coffee and at the birch trees outside the kitchen window, bare and silver in the early light, ice on the puddles from overnight. You know how the cottage gets. I had booked the cottage. I had organized every inch of it. I knew exactly how it got. I didn't reply. About 2 hours later, my daughter-in-law called. She was cheerful, the particular brightness she used when she wanted something to feel uncomplicated. She asked about the grocery order, whether the delivery was confirmed for the 22nd, whether I'd been able to find gluten-free options for her mother. She did not mention the text. She did not acknowledge that I had just been told I was no longer coming to the trip I had funded. She spoke to me as if I were still the coordinator, still the logistics, still the account they could draw from without needing to see my face. I answered her questions calmly. I said I'd look into it. I said I'd be in touch. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and sent my son one message. "Are you bringing the grandkids' snow boots? I was thinking I might pack the extra grip socks your dad used to keep in the car for icy steps. Just let me know if you need a pair." It was a small thing, a mother's thing, the kind of detail only someone who had been there, who was supposed to be there, would think to mention. I watched the ticks go blue. He had read it. He did not reply. I gave him 2 hours, then I called Sharon. I explained the situation simply. There had been a change in the guest list. I needed to restructure the booking. She didn't ask many questions, just said, "It's your booking, love. We'll sort it out however you need." We changed the lock code. She would send the new one only to me. I told her I'd be arriving with 5 friends on December 21st, a day early, and asked if the fireplace could be lit when we arrived. She said she'd have it ready. Then I canceled the grocery pre-orders in Charlottetown and placed a new one for 6 people. I removed the gluten-free items, none of my friends needed them, and added a proper selection of loose-leaf tea because one of them drinks 4 cups a day and doesn't apologize for it, which I have always admired. Then I made 6 phone calls. Augusta lives 3 streets over and hadn't left Ontario in 11 years. She said, "You're joking," and when I told her I absolutely was not, she said she'd be packed by morning. Mildred had lost her husband in March and told me at the funeral she hadn't slept through a night since. Laverne had worked beside me in the maternity ward for 17 years and said she was going slowly stir-cruisy since retiring. Velma had brought me soup every week for 2 months after Ted died and never once asked for anything back. Adeline is 81 years old, still drives herself to choir practice every Thursday, and said yes before I had finished the sentence. I told each of them the same thing. I have a cottage booked in Prince Edward Island for Christmas week. It sleeps 10. I need 5 women who want to go. We flew from Barrie to Toronto Pearson and connected through to Halifax Stanfield on December 21st. And I drove us across the Confederation Bridge in the late afternoon with the light going golden over the water. The bridge is 12.5 kilometers long, which I already knew because I had put it in the family itinerary I'd written back in September. And Adeline read the number out loud from the passenger window. 12.5 kilometers, with the reverence of someone encountering a minor miracle. The Gulf of St. Lawrence stretched out gray and enormous on both sides, and Laverne said, "Oh, just that, just quietly, oh," and the van was silent for a while in the best possible way. Sharon had the fireplace going when we arrived. The cottage smelled of wood smoke and pine, and the cold, clean air that comes straight off the water, and the windows looked out over exactly the view I had been carrying in my memory for 27 years. I set Ted's photo on the mantel that evening while the others were finding their rooms. The photo from that first trip, him on the porch, the gray water behind him, squinting into the November light, half smiling, the way he looked when he was at his most content. I touched the edge of the walnut frame. I brought people, I told him, just not the ones we thought. On the evening of December 23rd, I was standing at the stove, heating a lobster bisque I'd made from scratch the day before when my phone lit up on the counter. My son. I watched it ring. Then again, then a text. Mom, the lock code isn't working. Can you call Sharon? I stirred the bisque. Another text. The kids are in the van and it's cold. Please just call us back. Then a voicemail. Mom, it's Remy. I don't know what's going on, but the code isn't working, and Sharon says the booking is under your name, and she can't give us a new code without authorization from you. Can you please just call me back? Please. Then my daughter-in-law, a second voicemail, less patient. Hilda, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is completely unacceptable. We have children in a cold vehicle. You need to fix this right now. Then quiet for a while. Then my son again, his voice different. Mom, I think I understand what's happening. I think maybe we didn't handle this the way we should have. Just, can you please call me? We'll talk it through. I ladled the bisque into 6 bowls and brought them to the table where my 5 friends were sitting with their wine, and the candles lit, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, dark and enormous beyond the windows. Augusta had found a Cape Breton fiddle station streaming on her phone, and it was playing softly from the windowsill. Mildred had already eaten 2 pieces of the shortbread I'd made from Ted's mother's recipe, and was reaching for a third without guilt. We ate and we talked, and the candles burned lower, and nobody once looked at a clock. We talked about the years we'd spent being useful and needed and present for everyone else. We talked about the ones we'd lost and the ones we still carried. Velma said she couldn't remember the last time she'd sat somewhere and felt completely unhurried. Laverne said she had forgotten that a holiday was allowed to be peaceful. Adeline looked out at the dark water and said, "Isn't this something?" And I thought that covered it perfectly. Each night, I placed Ted's photo at the center of the table. Nobody asked me to move it. On Christmas Eve, we each said one thing aloud. Not a toast, not a performance, just a sentence, the kind that only surfaces when you're far enough away from your ordinary life to tell the truth. Mildred said she hadn't known there was still this much left in her. Laverne said she was going to stop apologizing for taking up space. Adeline said she had prayed every day since her husband died to feel something other than invisible, and that tonight she did not feel invisible at all. Augusta, who had not cried in front of anyone since her daughter's wedding years ago, cried quietly, and nobody made it into a thing. I said, "The man who loved this view always told me the best things in your life aren't the ones you planned. They're the ones that find you when you finally stop filling your hands with things that don't deserve them." I don't know entirely where that came from. Ted, or me, or the two of us blurred together the way long marriages eventually do. But I said it, and I meant it, and the candle burned low, and nobody wanted the evening to end. My son's email arrived on December 29th, 3 days after I returned home. The subject line said checking in. I opened it at my desk with a cup of tea and Ted's photo watching from the shelf. "Hi, Mom. Hope you had a good Christmas. Things were a bit of a mess on our end, as you probably know. We ended up at a hotel in Charlottetown for 4 nights, which was not cheap, especially over the holidays, and it really put us in a bind financially. I've been thinking about how to say this, and I think the honest thing is to just ask, would you be willing to help cover some of the hotel costs? I know there was miscommunication, and we probably could have handled things differently, but we're still family. Just let me know. No apology, no acknowledgement of the 22 months I had spent building that account dollar by dollar. No mention of the text at 6:47 in the morning. No question about whether I was all right, whether I'd had a good Christmas, whether I had spent it alone, or with people, or staring at the walls. Just we're still family, and just let me know. As though family were a credit account with no limit and a very short memory. I read it twice. I closed the laptop. I finished my tea. I looked at Ted's photo on the shelf, the one from the cottage porch, the gray water, the half-smile, and I thought about the promise I had made to myself at his bedside in those last weeks, that I would not spend whatever years I had left being quietly diminished by people who had decided my value was primarily logistical. I did not write back. I did not explain myself. I did not apologize for the lock code or the changed grocery order or the 4 nights in a Charlottetown hotel that they had to cover themselves for the first time in their adult lives. I owed them none of that. Instead, I opened a new document and started a list. Places I had never been. Newfoundland in September, when the colors are supposed to be extraordinary. The Cabot Trail before the leaves drop. The Magdalen Islands, which I'd only ever seen on maps. Augusta had mentioned once that she'd always wanted to see the northern lights from somewhere in the Yukon. Mildred had never seen the Rocky Mountains. Laverne wanted to take the train, the long one, coast to coast, through the Shield and the prairies, and over the mountains, and spend a whole week just watching Canada go past the window. We are already planning the next trip. It will not be cheap, and I am not pretending otherwise. I have my pension, and I still have my Saturday agency shifts, and I have a savings account I've renamed. I used to call it PEI Christmas, now it just says for us. Because what those 5 nights in North Rustico taught me is this: the people who show up at your table in December, who drink your tea and eat your shortbread, and say something true when the candle burns low, those people are worth every early morning and every skipped luxury and every dollar you quietly set aside. The people who text you to sit this one out and then ask you to cover their hotel bill. Those people already took what they came for. There is nothing left to give them, and that is not your failure. That is simply a fact you are now free to live with. On the last morning in North Rustico, I woke early and walked to the water alone while the others were still sleeping. The Gulf was dark and still, and the cold came off it clean and sharp. I stood there for a while just listening, to the water, to the quiet, to whatever it is that large bodies of water say when no one else is around to interrupt. I thought of Ted on that porch 27 years ago, squinting into the light. I thought of 6 women at a candlelit table saying true things into the November dark. I thought of a text at 6:47 in the morning that had, without meaning to, handed me something back. I am not someone's budget. I am not the ATM they forgot to bring along. I am not the woman who waits in someone else's kitchen, hoping this will finally be the year she gets to stay in the photo. I am the woman who booked the cottage, changed the code, drove 12.5 kilometers over the open water, and lit the candle anyway. And if that is what clarity costs, then I can tell you it was the best money I ever spent.